Honourable Member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill C-35, or as it's also known as Quanto's Law, to amend the criminal code, law enforcement animals, military animals, and service animals. And just to let you know that I'm supporting the bill at this second stage, though I'm hoping that some work will be done to it in committee. But first of all, Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss if I did not acknowledge what happened last Wednesday and also what it felt like to be back in the riding over the weekend. I can tell you that wherever I went in my riding, people were deeply concerned and were also very thankful for our safety, but also they were very sad about Corporal Nathan Cirillo. And for many of them to see their MPs back in the riding, because I remember talking to some constituents of other MPs as well, just to see their MPs back in the riding and back at doing the work of Parliament gave them a certain amount of reassurance. And many of them expressed that it was good, that we were not going to let what happened last Wednesday make us take drastic steps, that we should let the authorities do their work, do the investigation, and we need a very, very measured response to what happened. Absolutely, we need to review things, but also I think right now, as we're thinking of Corporal Cirillo, we're also thinking of his 6-year-old son, and we're thinking of his family and his friends. And I also want to acknowledge heartfelt gratitude to all the men and women in uniform in our building here, and those who came in, who risked their lives, who put themselves in harm's way in order to ensure the safety of not only the MPs, but we had young children here visiting, and we had other public and staff on the Hill as well. And I think it's these kind of tragedies that also remind us that we are a multicultural nation, we're a nation that loves. And for me, I was so touched this weekend because so many people, that's what it was about. Let's not look at our neighbors with different sets of eyes. Let's just hold hands and get through this together. And I felt that over and over again. And many of the religious, whether it was a masjid, mosque, as many of you would say, or whether it was a gurdwara, or whether it was a mandir, or whether it was a church, many held prayers over the weekend, and once again, prayers of gratitude and also prayers of acknowledging what has happened and praying that we continue to be the peaceful nation that we are, that we continue to love as we have always done and continue to be inclusive. So it would have felt strange if I didn't say a few of those things today, Mr. Speaker, in light of what happened last week. But as we are here to do the business of the people and here to debate bill, I'm going to get back to talking about this particular piece of legislation. And as we all know that this legislation has now been labeled Quanto's Law, which is in memory of Edmonton police service dog that was stabbed to death trying to stop a fleeing suspect in October 2013. And the Paul Joseph Vukamanich, and please apologies if I've managed to not pronounce the name correctly, pleaded guilty to animal cruelty and other offenses, including evading the police. He was sentenced to 26 months in prison and banned from owning a pet for 25 years. Mr. Speaker, we all know the important role that enforcement animals, military animals, and service animals play. And we are all very, very concerned when any harm is done to them deliberately. And it's because of that this law is here. But having been come from a family where we've had pets, dogs in our family for many, many years since the kids were little, it's very, very hard for me, and I think for many of us in this room, to imagine how somebody could attack a dog or any other service animal. And but it happens. And when I was telling my grandchildren that we'd be debating this bill, my granddaughter's reaction was, well, why is it only law enforcement animals that we're having this debate? And I explained some of the background of this bill to her. And of course, I have to remember, she still cries about a buddy who passed away a while ago, just every time she looks at a photo. So, you know, our pets are very, very close to us. But we do have some concern about this bill, Mr. Speaker, even though we are supporting it to go to committee. And our concerns, once again, point to something we've seen all too often, that when you see a piece of legislation come forward, doesn't matter what it purports to do, when you look at the details, it always has a little twist in there that makes it more difficult for us to see what is happening here. And there are two areas that are really causing us major, major concern. And this is not going to be news to anybody, because I've expressed concerns about minimum sentencing before and of consecutive sentences. So the introduction of minimum sentences and of consecutive sentences is causing us great concern, and we will be bringing amendments at committee stage. And I'm hoping, unlike in the past, we will see a certain level of cooperation from the government side, so that we can address a piece of legislation in a way parliamentarians are supposed to in a democracy, where the opposition at committee stage and in the House plays a critical role in pointing out the flaws in the bill, and the government, a good government, one that believes in democracy and the parliamentary process, would then heed some of that input and accept amendments and have what I would say a very, very robust debate. So what does this bill do? Concretely, this bill amends Section 445 of the Criminal Code. It creates a new offence for killing or injuring service animal, law enforcement animal, or military animal while the animal is on duty. It sets a minimum sentence of 6 months if a law enforcement animal is killed while perpetrating the offence, and it provides for the sentence imposed on a person to be served consecutively to any other punishment imposed on the person for an offence arising out of the same event or series of events. So you can see where we have difficulty, and that's in point 2 and point 3 I just made. And as I said earlier, with much of the legislation that has come from across the way, whether it's omnibus legislation that's usually thicker than the phone books in most of our municipalities around this country, the devil is always in the details. And once again, you know, I have to express a deep, deep concern that here we have a laudable bill. A laudable bill that could have gone through with, I would say, with much speed. Mind you, the government across the way have other ways of achieving speed. That could have gone through, but it's been tainted by the introduction of minimum sentencing, which is clearly reflects the repressive agenda that the government is bringing forward. And once again, it ties the hands of our judiciary. And once again, it has the legislative branch hampering the work of the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary, because even before the judge in question, or if it's a jury as well, hears the case, the sentencing has been predetermined, And so that is very, very disconcerting. And it takes away this kind of sentencing. May happen anyway, or it might even be longer sentencing. But once again, it takes away that discretion from the judiciary that they have. And, you know, one of the areas that I really want my colleagues across the way to think very, very seriously about is the consequences of minimum and consecutive sentencing for the criminal justice system. You know, Mr. Speaker, if crime could be solved just by putting people in prison, the US would have no crime today. Because when you look at the percentage of their population that is actually in prison, and we're talking about many states spending more on prisons than on combination of many of their other programs. If just putting somebody in prison could solve the issue, then the US would be crime-free. But also, we're already hearing about overcrowding in our prisons. We've heard testimony to that for another bill, and that creates concern as well. But for me, I have to admit, Mr. Speaker, the major concern is still tying the hands of the judiciary and taking that way of a judgment away from those who are appointed to carry out those jobs. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm just certainly hoping, and sometimes, you know, hope springs eternal, as you know, and in me at least, and in many of us. I am still hopeful that the government is not going to use many of the tools that they have used before to silence debate in this House. You know, I've even seen legislation go to being sent to committee where no witnesses were heard. No witnesses were heard because the majority, the government has, used those bullying tactics to make sure a major piece of legislation that actually redefines citizenship was pushed through without hearing any expert witnesses and through time allocation. And only last week we saw a closure motion, and time allocation seems to be the way my colleagues across the way feel they have to do business. And I find that very, very disconcerting. So I'm certainly very, very hopeful that when we're looking at legislation now, especially after last week, that we realize that we're all here to do the job of, to represent our constituents, and that when we're debating bills here, all of us, no matter which political party we are aligned with, or whether we're sitting here as independents, conservatives, NDP, liberals, that every one of us has a contribution to make. And that every one of us comes here to represent our constituents, and that every one of us wants to have legislation passed through this House that has gone through due diligence, that has had the proper oversight, and that then isn't left open to all kinds of other challenges. You know, there is a saying that I grew up with in England, you know, sometimes people can be penny wise and pound foolish. And I think of that saying often as we've rushed through legislation that has then ended up being challenged in the courts and ends up costing the Canadian tax dollars a huge amounts of money, or laws being passed that just make no sense and that actually take away people's rights. So for me, my appeal to my colleagues is, yes, we're supporting this bill at this stage, but we do have major concerns, and we want to have the time to be able to hear from witnesses and express those concerns, and we will definitely be bringing amendments. And I would love to have a bill go through where we go through all the stages in a very respectful manner. And being respectful doesn't mean just sitting there. It actually means listening and hearing and responding to the issues that are raised. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I know that there's already legislation in place and penalties in place, thank you, and fines are already set out in Section 445 of the Criminal Code for all animals other than cattle. So that's already there, and I think so we can reassure our families and friends who have cats, dogs, or other pets that there is already legislation in place. This is an amendment to that legislation. This just puts in, this piece of legislation specifically targets service and enforcement animals and military animals as well. And it's there for a reason. I mean, just as we have legislation if crime is committed against our RCMP officers or the military while they're on duty, and this actually is to parallel that. And it is no surprise, and I'm sure that there are forces, police departments across this country who may be supporting this bill, but I do know that the Edmonton Police Service does support the bill, and it is fair to assume that there are others who will be supporting it too. And I think that I support this bill because I think it's good to have this kind of legislation there that's very, very explicit. But as I said earlier, I do have some concerns. Here is a quote from Edmonton Police K-9 Unit Staff Sergeant Trevor Hermanutz, who said officers are pleased with the law. And this is what he said. "We know that now we have a law that is going to put some teeth to the matter. The fact that when people want to injure or kill law enforcement animals, there are some serious legal consequences to their actions." Just so you know, Mr. Speaker, and the number might have changed since I read this document for the first time, the RCMP currently has 157 police service dogs in service across Canada. Canada Border Service Agency has 53 dog and handler teams. So we're not talking about thousands, but we're definitely talking about a number that's just over 200. And, there isn't a person in this House, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't matter which side of the House we sit on, that condones in any way animal cruelty. And I can say on behalf of my colleagues that we condemn all forms of animal cruelty, all forms of animal cruelty. And that's a position we have supported for a long time, and it's reflected in Bill C-232 and Bill C-592. At the same time as we condemn that cruelty, we are also very, very cautious. I suppose we've been bitten one too many times because the Conservatives, my colleagues across the way, always manage to put some zingers in the bills they introduce. And sometimes I wonder if those zingers are just to see if we will oppose the bill. But this time I'm seriously hoping that they will look at our concerns at committee stage and assist us in putting some amendments in. Mr. Speaker, once again, I know I'm getting close to the end of my time. I do want to say that we do support this bill. However, there are two things that we do have very serious concerns about, and I'm going to reintroduce them to you, and that is the minimum sentence and the consecutive sentences. And for that, we are looking forward to hearing expert witnesses, and not one or two, being given to the opposition and then, oh, we've done this. But we really do want to have a robust debate on this. And I think this is an opportunity for us also to discuss minimum sentencing and their impact on the system and really how they impact the role of the judiciary. I get the feeling I have run out of time, Mr. Speaker, so thank you very much.